Chapter 4, Social Structure and Social Interaction. In this chapter, we're going to discover the significance of social structure and its components. In particular, the components are culture, social class, social status, roles, groups, and social institutions. Social structure refers to society's framework, consistency of the various relationships between people and groups that direct and set limits in human behavior. So before we discuss social groups and formal organizations in Chapter 5, we must first understand the major components of social structure: culture, social class, social status, roles, groups, and social institutions. Now, social structure is what surrounds us. It's what guides people's behavior. A person's location in the social structure, their social class, their social status, the roles they play, and the culture, the groups, and social institutions to which they belong underlies his or her perceptions, attitudes, and behavior. People develop these perceptions, attitudes, and behaviors from their place in the social structure, and they act accordingly. All of the components of social structure work together to maintain social order by limiting, guiding, and organizing human behavior, whether in a privileged position, a deprived position, or somewhere in between. Now, usually I would, in class, show the documentary about the Stanford prison experiment. So if you can click on this link, I'd like you to take a few moments and watch this experiment. In this experiment, you see how social structure can actually influence a person's behavior. When the social structure is defined as a prison and people are randomly assigned as prisoners or prison guards, we come to find really quickly how those social interactions transpire. People in power will define the situation, so they get the definition of the situation, and the group in power typically defines that social reality. So if the link does not work for you here, I will attach the link into e-learning on the left-hand side. You can click on web links or a video documentary tab, and it should be available for you there to watch. Here listed are the components of social structure: culture, social class, social status, roles, and groups. First, culture. As we learned in Chapter 2, culture determines, in the broadest sense, what kind of people we become. So culture refers to our language, our beliefs, our values, our behaviors, and even our gestures of the particular group. It also includes the material objects that the group uses. So growing up in the US, we look and act American, and we also think and feel like an American. So our shared culture is what makes us similar to one another, and it makes other people seem different. Next, we have our social class, and social class greatly impacts our social location that we hold in life. It is based on income, education, and occupational prestige. Large numbers of people who have similar income amounts, educational levels, and jobs with similar occupational prestige make up social class. Our social class influences not only our behaviors, but also our ideas and our attitudes. We will discuss this further when we get to Chapter 8. Now, our social status is often thought of in terms of prestige. Someone has, status; they're important, and some use it in, in their social media. But sociologists use it in a different way. We use social status to refer to the position that an individual occupies. A status may carry a great deal of prestige, like a judge or a doctor or an astronaut. or very little prestige, like a janitor or a newspaper vendor. Statuses are a part of our basic framework of living in society. It affects our actions and those of the people around us. Our status, whether son or daughter, teacher or student, provides guidelines for how we are to act and feel. It sets limits on what we can and cannot do. All human groups have them because they are essential to the social structure. Now, a status set is something that we have because we could have more than one status at a time. A status set refers to all of the statuses or positions that an individual occupies. So, for example, an example of a status set would be, being a son, a student, and also an athlete and a friend. So you can have all of these statuses and be all the same person. And these can change too, when you're finished being a student and you graduate and you get your first job. When that position changes, when you get that job, that your status also changes. If you're single and you get married, that your status changes from single to married. The same thing if you become a parent. Now we classify these statuses according to whether they're ascribed statuses or achieved statuses. And then we have something called a master status. The ascribed status is something that you're born into. These are positions an individual either inherits at birth or receives involuntarily later in life. So for example, your race and ethnicity, your sex, and your social class, the social class you're born into with your family. These would be, ascribed statuses. So these are something you're born into. Also statuses like, son and daughter, niece or nephew, being female or male. And your age is also something that is involuntary. Being a teenager or being a senior citizen. These are related to the life course, your age, and some of these statuses are often given to us later in life. Your achieved status, these are things you need to work at. You need to use your own unique talents in order to achieve these statuses. These are positions that are earned, accomplished, or involve at least some effort or activity on the individual's part. And this status is voluntary. If you want to become an athlete and be a tennis player, you would work at it. So that's an achieved status. If you want to be a friend, be a girlfriend, a marriage partner, these things take effort and they take work. And they can be positive or negative. For example, a CEO is an achieved status, but so is being a thief. And so you can be working at something that's either positive or negative. The master status is something that is such as being male or female, that cuts across all of your statuses that an individual occupies. So whether you're a doctor or a teacher, some people won't identify with that status. Instead, they identify with whether you were a male doctor or a female teacher. So no matter what you do, people perceive you as your master status. So maybe you are a tennis player, but people see you as a male or female tennis player. Race or ethnicity and age can also become that master status. So a lot of times our ascribed statuses tend to be also our master status. So they cut across our ascribed and achieved statuses. A status symbol are signs that people use who want others to recognize that they occupy a certain status. So for example, if you want people to recognize that you're married, people wear a wedding ring. The badge of a police officer, driving a fancy car, being in a military uniform, the collar of a priest, living in an expensive home, carrying a designer handbag. These are all status symbols. Now, a negative status symbol or a stigma symbol would mean something quite different. So the tattered or dirty clothing of someone who is homeless. The scarlet letter A from the book we read back in high school. The scarlet letter. Having a sticker for teenagers who are just learning how to drive. Some teenagers view that as being a stigma symbol because that identifies that car as a new driver. So these would be considered, both status symbols versus stigma symbols. Now, status inconsistency is when some people have a mismatch between their statuses. Usually our statuses tend to fit together and they have, built-in norms. And this helps us know what to expect in all our different social interactions. When an inconsistency occurs, like when someone may be dating someone who is much, much older than they are, we may not know how to act in that situation. So that would be an example of a status inconsistency. Now here is a nice illustration of someone who holds multiple statuses. So this is this young woman's ascribed statuses and achieved statuses. So it gives you nice examples of the different types of statuses. The ascribed are things we're born into, being a female. She's 20 years old. She's a daughter. She's Latina. And she's also a sister. So those are things that are involuntary. Her achieved statuses are that she's, a classmate. She's a roommate that, takes work to be someone's roommate. Your employee, whatever the occupation might be, being a friend, being a teammate, being an athlete, being a student. Here's another diagram or an illustration of statuses. If you think about it in terms of, if this is a football game or, baseball game and even a basketball game, look at the different positions or what we call statuses in society that people play. You know what your position is, you know what your roles are, and you know how, what the other players on your team are supposed to do in those interactions. And so you also take into consideration what the other team might be doing. And so you can, come up with plays and strategies to playing on that field. A good way to illustrate, the different statuses that we hold and other people hold and who we interact with. Now, roles, another component of the social structure, are the behaviors, obligations, and privileges that are attached to a status. You see, we occupy a status, but we play a role. And roles are an essential part of culture because they lay out what is expected of people. And as individuals perform their roles, those roles mesh together to form the society. Now, most of us follow the guidelines for what is appropriate for our roles because of how we are socialized. We want to do what is expected. But there are often times that we find ourselves in positions of role strain and role conflict. Role conflict is because of the many different roles that we have. And role strain can be because of the same role but differing expectations. So if you look at this illustration, it kind of nicely lays out, role conflict. There's you, this is to the left-hand side, and you're our son or daughter. You're a friend, you're a student, and you're a worker. Well, it comes to being a son or daughter, you might have to visit mom in the hospital. Your friend is having a party, so do you go to the 21st birthday party? As a student, you're trying to prepare for your exam. And then as a worker, you may be called in to come in for emergency overtime. So that's an example of role conflict. What do you do? How do you handle a situation like that? What do you do? Do you visit mom? Do you go to the party? Do you prepare for your exam? Or do you go into work? And we all deal with conflicts like this often many times. When you think about role strain, there's you as a student. You're doing really well in your classes, which is wonderful. But you don't want to make your other, classmates feel bad. So, how do you handle that strain? You kind of manage that strain on your own. Maybe you don't brag about it, or maybe you try to assist your friend. So role strain and role conflict are things that might come up as we sort of try to manage all of these statuses that we hold. Groups are an important component of the social structure. And groups consist of people who regularly and consciously interact with one another and who share similar values, norms, and expectations. When we belong to a group, we give others the right to judge our behavior and have some control over our lives. And we assume an obligation to the group. And the control depends on the relationship. and the amount of interaction we have with that particular group. So for example, think about a book club. A book club is a group whose members may influence the book that you read. Different people, different members of the club might, someone might plan the discussion questions. Somebody might also, participate in snacks, and everyone kind of plays their part. Also, your peer group, think about a peer group, may influence many aspects of your life if you want to remain friends with them. So we kind of go and become very cooperative, or in order to maintain our membership in that particular group. We'll go into greater detail about groups in Chapter 5. Social institutions are organized the usual standard ways a society meets its basic needs: the family, religion, education, the economy, medicine, politics, law, science, the military, and the mass media are all social institutions. Each has its own groups, status, values, and norms. They are significant because they set limits and provide guidelines for our behavior. If our social institutions were different, then our orientation to life would be different. We will focus more on this a little bit later. I'm going to show you a table where we see, depending on where, what our family consists of, what religion we belong to, the type of education we receive, the type of health care we receive, where we live in terms of our geography, what government, what laws, politics, all of these social institutions have an impact on our lives. And so if we're living here in the United States, or if we're living in Europe or some other part of the world, those things would vary. Our life would be very different. In this table, I know it's a lot on this table, but figure 4.2 are the various social institutions. There's some even more than I mentioned. Science and military. And in this table, if you take a look at each column, it shows you the basic needs that are being met, the groups or organizations, the different statuses, some of the values, and some norms. So if you just take the top and look at the family, the family is intended to regulate reproduction, and socialize and protect children. Some groups, relatives and kinship groups, so would be the groups that are in the social institution of the family. The statuses that are included are, daughter, son, father, mother, brother, sister, aunt, uncle, grandparent. And some of the values, maintaining sexual fidelity, providing for your family, keeping a clean house, respect for parents, are some of the things you value in a family. Some of the norms, have only as many children as you can afford, be faithful to your spouse. So those are some of the norms that are related to that particular social institution. So if you go through each one of them, you'll see there's different characteristics. Next, we're going to talk about, comparing functionalist and conflict perspectives. Functionalist and conflict theorists have very differing views on social institutions. First, functionalists, they view society and social institutions as established ways to meet the group's basic needs. So what are, they ask the question, what are society's basic needs in order to survive? And they have developed 5 functions. And society, they say, must replace its members, socialize the new members, produce and distribute goods and services, preserve order, and provide a sense of purpose. When it comes to replacing members, this is through reproduction. The family is developed to meet the universal need to protect infants and children. Also, immigration and annexation is another way to replace the members of society. The second is to socialize new members. Each member must be taught, either formally in schools, religion, or by family, or peer-to-peer. Groups, they provide the basic expectations that are learned. The next function is producing and distributing goods and services. Each society must provide for its members. They need to provide food and clothing and shelter, but also education. There also is the need for preserving order, to protect against internal chaos or external attacks. So we have, governing to prevent, we have armies to prevent any kind of external attacks to our society, and then internally, social order is preserved through our court system, our justice system, and in the police to police our individuals in society. So establishing laws and a way to police its members, developing military to defend against attacks. And the last is providing a sense of purpose. Each society must establish means for its members to maintain and want to remain as part of the group. Religion, the family, the school instill a sense of purpose, a belonging, so its members put aside self-interest or personal gain for the good and the needs of the group. This is patriotism, to providing that sense of purpose, a sense of patriotism. Now, from the conflict perspective, although they too agree that social institutions meet basic societal needs, they stress that powerful groups control our social institutions. An elite group that maintains their own privileged position of wealth and power. The elite control the wealth, and they wish to maintain that status quo. They make the nation's major decisions. Now, feminists, too, argue, feminists which are derived from a conflict perspective, argue that social institutions divide males and females into separate groups, each with unequal access to society's resources. Now, we've considered changes in our social structure. Social structure changes and it evolves, adjusting to changing values, new technologies, to contact with other cultures, innovative ideas, and globalization. So it's not static. It's not something that stays the same. We see changes, and these changes ultimately affect our lives. For example, changes in the economy as a result of globalization may result in job losses or new skills and requirement for the jobs we are after. Therefore, these changes in social structure occur as culture changes because of our evolving values, new technologies, our innovative ideas, and globalization. So sociologists ask the question, what holds society together? During times of social change, or when there is a threat or breakdown in society, how does society stay together? So we're going to talk about two theorists who have some explanation as to when this occurs. So as societies grow, as they modernize, there's a fundamental shift in the relationships that occurs. So here we have Emil Durkheim, and he was interested in how members of society managed to create social integration, or the degree that members share values and other social bonds, like norms and customs and values. And he found the key to social cohesion in the concepts of mechanical solidarity and organic solidarity. Mechanical solidarity is a collective conscious that people experience as a result of performing the same or similar tasks. Think rural farming life in which people see tasks through from beginning to end. They plant the crops, they grow the crops, and then they cultivate and harvest them. There's little diversity in behavior, in thinking, or in attitudes. And because they have so much in common, their unity depends on sharing similar views. As society gets larger, tasks get divided up, so a division of labor occurs. And so in this division of labor, tasks become more specialized. So someone grows the crops, someone bakes the bread, and someone sells the bread. Or if we think about, fishing, let's think of, a lot of people go fishing in Jersey. So, one person catches the fish, one person drives the fish to market, and another person sells the fish. That's a division of labor. And we all start to depend on one another. We no longer depend on one another to have similar views and behaviors. Instead, we depend on each other to do specific work that contributes to the group. And this develops into what we call organic solidarity. And organic solidarity is a collective conscience based on the interdependence that is brought about by increasingly specialized division of labor. Sort of like the organs in the body that operate or function to keep the body working as a whole. Again, Durkheim was a functionalist. This is a very functionalist perspective. Each performs its own tasks, but they need each other to survive. The organs, organic, comes from the organs of the body. This changed from a time when people worked together, had similar views, lived near one another, to a society in which social integration relies on our separate activities contributing to the good of the group, allowing our society to tolerate diversity to different orientations to life. And here we have Ferdinand Tönnies, and Ferdinand Tönnies explains that he was at one point interested in the shifts in relationships, and he analyzed how intimate communities, Gemeinschaft, was being replaced by impersonal associations, a Gesellschaft. Again, German sociologist, German terms. Gemeinschaft is a society in which life is intimate, a community in which everyone knows everyone else, and people share a sense of togetherness. These are intimate communities. Rural life. As society was emerging, it was being replaced by the Gesellschaft, a society dominated by impersonal relationships, individual accomplishments, and self-interest. More of an urban life. So here we see examples of society as they move from a village life to a more impersonal community life. So why are we talking about this? Why are these concepts important or relevant today? And really, they help us understand contemporary events. Fear in societies that still exist as warm personal relationships will be replaced by cold impersonality, these changing values and morality. The sociological viewpoint is that social structure sets the context for what we do, feel, and think, and ultimately then for the kind of people we become. So as societies change, so do our orientations to life. So understanding these changes in what holds society together really helps us to understand that and understand that concept.